Here we go. Okay, thank you. All right. Welcome everyone to the 2024 new construction notice of affordability pre-application meeting. Hildy, if you can go to the next slide. Oops. I'm still seeing the first slide. Okay, there we go. Just want to do a quick round of introductions. I'm Krisha Katzmulvey, the Housing Development Services Manager, joined by Allie Gaylord, our Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development, and Arlisha Doradas, who's the Housing Development Coordinator for the new construction NOFA, is out on vacation, but we're recording this and she will be handling all of the question and answer posting. We're also joined by Hildy Mile, who's working with the city as a consultant. Next slide. Just want to go over quickly the agenda for today and some quick ground rules. We're starting with an overview of the NOFA process, some priorities and changes that we've made, also requirements, some city contacts. We're joined here by other departments from the city, and then open up for Q&A. So if you can put your questions in the chat, we can answer those both there and if you want to verbally at the end of the scoring for Q&A or for any city contacts later. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, this is our competitive application process for awarding the City of Oakland's funds for new construction affordable housing, and that we'll be making funding awards based on ranking and funding availability. And we're also starting up a pipeline process that we commenced last year, where we're going to alternate a funding pipeline with the new construction NOFA, award on that to the extent that we have funds available for approximately 18 to 24 months, and then start up another new construction NOFA process in another 18 to 24 months, that we periodically refresh our NOFA application pipeline, but also make it easier for folks to be able to apply for funding as funding becomes available from us. And just as a reminder, this is from our strategic action plan for Oakland HCD for 2023 to 2027. We are prioritizing capital dollars first for homeless exits, either through our Home Key and rapid response homeless housing programs, or through homeless and permanent supportive housing in the new construction NOFA. But we also acknowledge that there's a tension there because we don't have operating funding to the full extent that we would like in order to help the 5,500 homeless Oaklanders exit homelessness. So we've got a lot of work to do here. Next slide, please. In terms of our timing, we released the NOFA September 23rd. This is October 7th, the bidders meeting. Our electronic applications will be available on City Data Services on October 10th. We're also having office hours on October 11th and the 18th. And the applications are due November 4th at 5 p.m. in CDS, City Data Services. We expect that initial awards will be made in January 2025. We do have council authority to make those awards without returning to councils. That will be setting up projects to apply for state tax credit and other funding rounds early in 2025. And then as described, we can make funding available as we have funding come up. We'll know more about the fiscal year 26 as we approach next spring. So we'll be able to continue making pipeline awards there. Next slide, please. We are changing things a little bit with regards to our question and answers. We are scheduling 2 question and answers. One will have questions due on October 10th, and the second will be questions due on October 17th. We're going to ask that application is due, sorry, I see Eve, November 4th. Thank you. So we are asking for the Q&As for folks to submit their questions in writing. We really want to make sure that everybody has the same information as everybody else. And so having individual meetings about project applications and strategizing about project applications isn't something that we're able to do. Hilda, if you can go to the next slide. Okay. And then we're asking that no application questions be submitted after October 18th. If you run into a technical problem, please do let us know. But if you've got questions about the scoring or anything like that, please submit those prior to October 18th. Next slide. In terms of funding for this NOFA, we're projecting to have at least $66 million initially available for the new construction NOFA. The biennial budget process, as I mentioned, is in progress right now, and we'll know more about funding going forward in the spring. Potential funding sources include our affordable housing trust funds, our boomerang dollars and impact fees, low and moderate income asset funds, local housing trust funds, home funds. And the bulk of funding really is from our voter approved bond measure U. But all of those funding sources are in play for this NOFA. Next slide, please. We've done some work in terms of our NOFA priorities to further align them with state funding guidelines, including targeting people experiencing homelessness and also extremely low-income households. We are, as I mentioned previously, seeking to build the city's pipeline. So we're looking at projects that submit complete applications, meet all threshold requirements, and achieve a minimum score of 53 points would be in the pipeline for further consideration for the current NOFA cycle for the next 18 to 24 months. We're not guaranteeing funding, but we'll be considering folks for funding as it becomes available. We've also refined our emerging developer policies to allow for more opportunity for less experienced developers to qualify for the NOFA and to incentivize these developers to joint venture with emerging or to experienced developers to joint venture with emerging developers. Next slide. I have a couple of NOFA highlights for this round. One is that we do have a set aside pool of $15 million for projects that have participation from the Oakland Housing Authority. In turn with that, we also have separate Oakland Housing Authority funding that's available for operating pre-development capital assistance and or project-based vouchers or other operating assistance, probably in the form of the rental operating assistance that some of you have seen on recent projects. I do want to make a note that you should not contact our friends at the Housing Authority regarding the separate operating funding that's available. Basically, we'll go through this funding process, figure out who is achieving funds, notify the Housing Authority, and they'll be able to see which projects align best with their available funding sources for that $10 million in operating. We also combined some of the homeless and special needs unit scoring that was both separate and double counted in the last few NOFA rounds, so that they're counted in the same category. And we have a tiebreaker for, typically projects don't need a tiebreaker, but in case we do, it'll be projects that have demonstrated the highest percentage of commitments of permanent funding as a percentage of their. Next slide, please. We have a few process changes. This go around, we anticipate having about $2.3 million in home funding. And in the past, we've always told folks that they should just plan that they might be the project that gets the home funds. For this round, we're actually letting folks opt in to be considered for that home funding. You need to take into account all of the choice limiting actions that come with potential home funds. And if you have a current NOFA awarded project that you might be seeking more funding for that already has home funds, you should probably still contemplate that you'll be keeping those home funds. But we are trying, knowing that the home funding comes with additional requirements in terms of NEPA process and utility allowances, trying something new this round to see if we can make that optional. We've also returned to a financial workbook attachment that is more familiar to folks who might have worked on projects from 2020 and prior. It's updated with some new revisions, but we did hear a lot of feedback that the model that we had switched to wasn't really working for folks, so we have switched back. There also is not this round application limit on how many applications a developer can submit. We would caution you, though, that incomplete applications will be rejected because we need to make sure that what is being submitted is a real project that can move forward. Next slide, please. We have some scoring changes in 2024. We did make some tweaks to the competitiveness for state resources in terms of state tax credit tiebreaker scores that you should take a look at. We also changed the funding commitments so that it is a little bit more streamlined for construction period through permanent financing, and also more specific about long-term operating subsidy scoring. We did also add a category for, or change the category for land use approvals, where we're further prioritizing projects with ministerial approvals, S1314, SB35. I think there's a slight typo in this. It should be in an SB35 approval process, acknowledging that those projects go through approvals process faster and have some cost savings. Next slide. Also made some slight refinements to the leveraging scoring. Added a category for land donation. We wanted to not exclude projects that are not on public land, but acknowledge that projects that are on public land are especially important to develop as affordable housing. And so added scoring, for those properties, especially if that are under market value or on a long-term ground lease paid only by surplus cash. We also did refine our geographic equity scoring so that there were a couple of holes in the project mapping, and basically we've assigned proximity scoring to those in order to prioritize also projects that are serving community neighborhoods where there are displacement pressures. And I do acknowledge that there's tension there between the displacement pressures, infill neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods that are likely to score better for tax credits under high priority areas or high resource areas. All right, next slide. We did make some changes to the target population, basically wanting to continue our goal of serving extremely low income folks and homeless exits, but also loosened up the scoring a little bit in recognition of the fact that we don't have all of the operating support that folks need in order to bring those units online. And we also want to prioritize project stability over the long term. So it is a little bit easier to get the income targeting points this round. And we also streamlined the developer experience points. We did technically decrease points, but the categories there were relatively subjective. And most people earned full points anyway, so they weren't adding any additional benefit to the scoring. But we are looking at projects where you've completed at least 3 affordable housing development projects, one of which is similar, and then awarding points for more experience beyond that. Next slide. We also refined the emerging developer score category and scoring so that it's tied to state scoring definitions for emerging developers, which require some developer have completed at least 1, but not more than 4 projects. And then points will be awarded under emerging developer points for projects fully owned by an emerging developer entity. We cleared up on joint venture points that those are for joint ventures with an emerging developer. That was not entirely clear last round. And we also eliminated, there was a small bonus points category that in the past has been used for either artist housing or teacher housing or community spaces that are below market on the ground floor of buildings that weren't heavily used and weren't super well defined. So we've eliminated those this round. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to pause there and see if there are any questions on scoring before we introduce our colleagues from other departments.
I have a question, Christian. It's Alyssa.
Okay, yeah.
On some of the scoring things, or like on the tiebreakers related to SIDLAC and TCAC and all that, is there some sort of calculation page? I didn't see anything in the workbook to make sure that everyone's calculating things the same way. You know, are you giving us kind of the scoring calculation that we plug into, or are we all just submitting our own calculations for that, and also for the the operating subsidy and capitalized value?
Hildy,
Thanks.
you've been working on the application. Can I tag you in for that? Yeah. Oh,
Thanks, Alyssa. On the capitalized operating subsidy, we're trying to follow SIDLAC's application as much as possible. So we're giving the application workbook gives you some leeway in how you're looking at that. There's a little bit of a difference whether it's a rental subsidy or an operating subsidy. So we're allowing the workbook to give you some flexibility in that, but the idea is that you are following those SIDLAC or TCAC guidelines. Sorry, the other question was around the tiebreaker calculation. I think
in this case, tiebreaker for the tax credit.
The
scoring,
tax,
yeah,
not the NOFA itself,
right?
Our internal tiebreaker, but looking at the SIDLAC, our 9% or 4% scoring. As in prior NOFAs, we're asking for your narrative to address that when you talk about in the application, it talks about submitting a summary about your competitiveness for the 9% or 4% as applicable. So we'd like to know what your assumptions are to go into that score.
Okay, but you have a very specific, you get points for having very specific tiebreaker scores. And so it doesn't seem like you would, in a narrative, you wouldn't necessarily be able to make sure that everybody was doing the calculation the same way. If we just write you a narrative saying we get 80, we get a tiebreaker of 80 or whatever it is. You're not asking for any sort of verification of how that's being calculated?
I assume we may ask a follow-up to verify that.
Or, hi, this is Allie. If I could just jump in and maybe ask Alyssa, are you suggesting that maybe it would be easier for us to require like the SIDLAC workbook as an exhibit?
Seems like you'd want to require something to make sure that people were all doing their calculation the same way and people weren't just saying, oh, my tiebreaker is 81 or something.
Right, yeah, and I think we were saying like
all-
if you outlined everything in a narrative form, then we could kind of check
Back
people's
into it.
work, but it may be
Yeah.
easier to just submit a workbook as evidence, and I think we could just upload a slot for that to be
Mhm.
uploaded to the portal.
Yeah, Hilda, let's work on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for that question.
Yeah.
Lieben has her hand up.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Krista. I have a few questions, but I'll just start with the first one, which is in the funding commitment category, if a
Mhm.
project maximum scores for having all construction and perm funding commitments, but does not require operating subsidy, it appears it can't maximum score because it's not eligible for the operating subsidy points.
Mhm.
So this advantages projects that have operating subsidy commitments from public sources, since only public sources count, from projects that don't need them for financial feasibility, but maybe as deep in terms of affordability. Is that intentional?
Yes, because we are still also trying to get projects that have permanent supportive housing and homeless housing. And we anticipate that in order to do that, they would need operating support. This, I would say, is unlike state tax credits where almost everybody gets perfect scores or perfect scores -1 for folks that aren't in a high resource area. There's some push-pull in the scoring to reflect that.
Yeah, I just, ask about it because, you can have substantial special needs and supportive housing without operating subsidy. There are other ways of doing it. So it would bypass those projects that have figured out how to do so otherwise, and that actually might be healthier because operating subsidies always have finite terms. And as we've seen with Home Key and MHSA, those terms run out. So anyway, I wanted to, one, ask for clarification, but also raise that.
And I if I can, sorry, this is Allie again. If I could also jump in, we removed. There used to be scoring categories for Section 8 or PBV commitments, and we removed that category. So, but I think it's the same as before. That if you did not have a PBV or some other operating subsidy commitment, that you could not score maximum points. So that would be aligned, but just being calculated differently. And Hildy, I know you worked on this too, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think I'll just go at it real quickly, which is what I think one of the issues is that we're in the new CalAIM ECM generation. And so rental support is not going to look the same. It's not going to look like an operating subsidy. And so we're not going to get those points for CalAIM supported projects, but they are deeply affordable and deeply in reaching those populations. So I think we're in a new world with CalAIM. And so this may disadvantage the CalAIM projects.
Right, but it's still not a committed source, like that it still has to be re-upped for each. So it's not acting the same way as a permanent dedicated or permanent 15-year dedicated source would be.
Yeah, it's not.
Okay, well, I think that's the distinction.
And I think if you want to ask questions about how that might be reflected, you should submit a question about that in writing, and then we can share in more detail with the whole group how we would consider that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out because it's different from how the state's handling it.
Do you see Paul has a question? And then I want to discuss, bring on our partner departments within the city, and then we have time for more questions at the end.
Perfect. Thank you, Krisha. I'll keep it short and maybe, submit a written response as well, but just had a question around land use approvals. I know clearly you guys are prioritizing ministerial approvals, getting full points, but for projects that have already received discretionary approvals, are we also don't get full points, even though you've received all approvals and are ready to go, or how's that scored?
The scoring currently is for 10 points instead of 20 points, but so you're still getting points, just not as many.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Let's turn to our friends in planning and building. I do want to get a sense. So in the program description on page 9 is a description of how to approach your planning and building approvals if you don't already have them. Just want to be clear, we don't expect you to have building permits in process at the time you're applying for NOFA funding, but you do want to have your planning approvals. I'll just do a quick check and see who from planning and building is here, if you guys can raise your hand. Not. But Ed Manassi, planning and building deputy director, Robert Merkamp, zoning manager, and Heather Klein, who handles all of our NEPA reviews. Emails are listed here, and this material will be posted on the website as well. Next slide. Our city Department of Workforce and Employment Standards, local hire, local contracting requirements do apply and are also detailed in the NOFA and linked to the city's website. I believe I did see Shelley Darrensburg on here. Shelley, if you want to.
Hi, Krista. Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Krista said, we at the project will require successful applicants must comply with the City of Oakland's labor standard and business inclusion programs. And it's important because we could assess penalties as liquidated damages for not meeting that. But we don't want to do that. So I'm going to be here to help you all through the process. But you are going to be required now to meet with DWES staff to review how you plan to comply with the requirements. And I know there are some usual suspects who have been going through this program a long time, and they'll understand that. But for new developers, let us come sit down and talk to Dwes about how we maximize local business participation on these projects and local or resident participation on this project. We can do it, and we do it normally. We probably need much more diversity there, but we are, for the most part, meeting our local employment and our local business requirements. And in that program, there are a number of uh, things that you can do to maximize participation. And these things, as the developer, you'll have them ready to talk to a prime or bid to a prime. And so that we all understand that we have a 15% Oakland apprenticeship program, and it applies to projects over $15,000. And it is in line with the public apprenticeship or public works apprenticeship, which is 20%, and we carve out of that already required apprenticeship an Oakland apprenticeship requirement. And I'm sorry if I'm switching back and forth, because I want to say with our local business program, we have what is called an availability analysis, that when we think or when you believe there is not enough work, or there are not enough certified firms to perform the work, we can perform an availability analysis and see if we have the required certified firms to meet and leave the 50% intact or to reduce. And we do have the discretion to reduce it as far down to zero, but believe me, that won't happen. We are so proud of our affordable housing projects and how um, they come through with local business and local employment all the time. So it's great. Prevailing wages, for the most part, applies. There are some exemptions that may not may where your project may be exempt from prevailing wages, but even let's talk about that at the meeting that you'll be required to have. And I also want to really clarify that the program doesn't only apply to construction, but it applies to professional services. When you submit a proposal to housing and you give a budget, if part of that budget are professional services, architectural, engineering, or any type of services, that is also applicable to the small local program. Any purchase of professional services of more than $50,000, it applies. And a lot of times we're forgetting that. But so prevailing wages will apply, and living wages for the work by the developers. And it's those folks, those clerks and other assistants that may not be the professional staff, but they'll have to be paid a living wage, and that will be in the documents or it's available. We do require the submittal of electronic payroll to monitor the payment of prevailing wages and to monitor local employment guidelines as well. I'm excited. I'm always excited about affordable housing. I've
Thanks
lived
so
in
much, Shelley.
Oakland a long time. Thank you, Krista.
Yeah. The City of Oakland local hire, local contracting and employment program standards are described in brief on page 45 of the program description. And then there's also a link to the Department of Workforce and Employment Standards website with more info. All right, next slide. And then in terms of other city contacts, I believe, I know I saw Shayna Hirschfield Gold from our environmental services group with Public Works is here. We scoring that is based on green building with certain minimum standards and then points for exceeding those. And we also have Kristen Zaremba from our Economic and Workforce Development Department's Cultural Arts Group, who will work with applicants on public art requirements and meeting those. And I know that Kristen said that she might be on, but with mixed in, maybe bad connection. But if you guys wanted to do a quick synopsis or intro, otherwise we can follow up with questions to you.
Just thrilled that this is happening. Thrilled to see so many people on the Zoom call, and here to answer any needed.
Great, thank you. All right, next slide. So the City Data Services electronic application will be live starting Thursday. And you'll be able to start entering in information in the electronic application at this time. We're also, in addition to the Q&A sessions, going to have a CDS training session on October 10th at 1 p.m. All of this information is included in the NOFA application. All right, next slide. Any further questions, folks? I know it's a lot, Lieben.
Thanks, Kristia. I emailed this question, but just wanted to clarify because of course it affects target population. But the special needs MHP reference is referencing an out-of-date definition for special needs. Just wanted to confirm the city is okay with the updated state special needs definition, can we use those additional categories?
And I saw you submitted that question online. I think we're gonna take a look at that and then respond out to the whole applicant list with that.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Sorry, that reminded me of a question. I can't find my hand raising thing. In the developer fee section, your first paragraph says that you're following TCAC, but then in the later paragraphs where it describes it, it talks about a much more restrictive developer fee. Is your intent to follow TCAC or not follow TCAC?
It is following TCAC generally, but there are maximums for what will allow on our project. So that's included in the addenda,
Yeah,
the developer fee addenda. Yeah.
right. That's what I was referring to. So you're saying that the first paragraph is kind of just says, oh yeah, we're following TCAC, but then it's the following paragraphs that are
Up
that are
to
the
certain
relevant
limits.
ones. Yeah.
And I am seeing questions about the zoning conformance letter deadline and expected turnaround time. Carrie, I think that is partially laid out in the application and the NOFA description. I don't know if anybody from planning and building is on who wants to weigh in on expected turnaround time, but we can ask what that is and then respond back.
Hi, this is Robert Merkamp.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, it varies based on the earlier we can receive it, the better, of course. I think usually we've been able to turn them around in several weeks, but it really depends on the complexity of the project and the amount of information we're going to receive. So, you know, we'll be looking forward for these to come in, and the more information you can give us, the better, so we can help move those along quickly.
Thank you. And then there's a question about expiration date for environmental reports, and that is covered in the application info. Let me just take a look for that. And we also had an additional question on that, so that will also be going out in the Q&A. Also seeing questions about ineligible costs, excluding furnishing. So furnishings would not typically be an eligible cost for funding unless it's a special needs project. The question is whether furnishings are an eligible use for special needs in a family project. If they're special needs, then they're special needs. I will say that there's a home restriction against using home funds on furnishings, but that doesn't mean you couldn't use other furnishing. We just would check for specific fund restrictions. Also seeing a question about home key projects being part of this NOFA. There is actually a separate request for proposals process that is for home key and our rapid response homeless housing program. The rapid response homeless program is still open, but the home key for round 4 applications did close earlier this spring. And I did see Eileen's hand up, so I want to take a break.
Oh, thanks. I just put my question in the chat. I figured it'd be easier.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Do you need to submit? Okay, so let me just go down. So I'm seeing a lot of great questions. May not be able to answer all of these in here, but we'll add them to the Q&A. But there's a question about developer experience. What is considered affordable housing? And can you expand on equivalent size, scale, and level of amenities? We're going to consider affordable housing, restricted affordable housing, developed tax credit projects. Potentially home key could be sort of a similar project, might not, or could be a project, may not be a similar project to a tax credit deal because they're very different. And equivalency in size, scale, generally means that, you know, if you're proposing a 75 unit project, that the other projects that are submitted be somewhat similar in size. A single family unit is not going to count as a similar project. So if that helps a little, and we can expand more in the Q&A session. Okay. Do you need to submit a market study with your application? No, there are provisions for either submitting a market study or rent comps. And you'll see that in the application. Allie's answered more fully the home keep question. And I see, Eileen, you've got your hand up again.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Just as it relates to Audrey's question, because we're both trying to get specific on our developer experience. Do you have any feelings about, like, we have a lot of senior housing, basically, but we're now applying for family housing. And so is that considered experience? Does the population have any?
We're talking about like tax credit project to tax credit
Yes.
project. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. If you were somebody that had done all family housing and we're proposing a senior 202 deal, we might have more concerns about whether that's a similar project.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you for all of these questions. We're going to go through the recording and also through the chat to provide a more cohesive, complete written response to the Q&As. And if you do have additional questions, please do submit those in writing to us. David.
The NOFA describes for publicly owned sites, fully executed ENA or PSA is required. If the ENA has expired because the project now has an LDDA, can that be submitted instead?
Sorry, the ENA has expired, but
Well, the project now has an LDDA.
oh, well, yes, that would count.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. I'm
Quick
seeing
follow-up. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, quick follow-up question to that. So the appraisal requirement, if the city owns the land and the city got the appraisal, but they're not the project sponsor, I'm kind of assuming we can use it, right? Because we didn't get another appraisal because the city had gotten one.
Correct. And you're using a land
Yes,
donation or similar.
from the city, yeah.
Okay, and I'm seeing a question. Okay, thank you, Allie. There's a question in the chat about why the home key round 4 is closed by the city. We are co-applicants for the home key round 4 and did a solicitation in the spring in anticipation of the state's home key round to identify projects that we could then position to move quickly forward to apply once the home key round 4 NOFA is out. Any other questions? Can always send them by email. Please do copy Arlisha. Durades, ADURADES at oaklandca.gov. She is out this week, but when she returns, we'll prepare those and turn them around for folks next week. Thank you. And I do just want to take a moment and thank everyone here for commitment to providing affordable housing opportunities for low-income Oaklanders. It's really super important. Final question I'm seeing, is there a guideline to how recent the market study has to be? Note, it doesn't have to be a market study per se. If you have one, that's great. But you can also do a rent comp survey, and the guidelines for that are in the application itself. Thank all of you. Stay cool. And we look forward to getting your submittals.
Let's go. Build affordable housing. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
everyone.
Going to stop the recording. Stop recording. I want to see